The year was 1940. France was under siege. The Allies, a formidable force of French, British, Dutch, and Belgian troops, stood ready. They had the numbers. They had the machinery, tanks, planes, and artillery, more advanced than ever. On the other side was Germany, a smaller army with fewer resources. But something was different. After the First World War, the Allies had crippled Germany. The Treaty of Versailles had left it in ruins, weak, defeated, or so it seemed. Still, Germany managed to win a stunning victory in the Battle of France, and that too in a mere 6 weeks. The Allies' defeat in this war sent shocks throughout the world. Its swiftness and completeness amazed even the Germans. The question arises, how did France, a major military power with 20 years of war planning, lose disastrously alongside British, Belgian, and Dutch forces in a mere 6 weeks? How did the Allies, with all their strength, fall to a seemingly weaker Germany? How did France, with one of the greatest armies, lose a war so quickly? What went wrong with the British, Belgian, and Dutch forces? How did it come to all this? The Battle of France was not just a clash of the armies. It was a clash of strategies, a clash of fate and destiny. This is the story of how the unthinkable became a reality, how the Allies lost the Battle of France. Before the start of the Second World War, the French military commander of World War I and World War II, Maxime Weygand, boasted, "You ask my opinion of the French army, and I will tell you frankly and in all truth, I believe the French army has a greater value than at any other time in history. It possesses material of first quality, fortifications of the first order, excellent morale, and a remarkable high command. No one among us desires war, but I affirm that if we are forced to win a new victory, we will win it." Little did Weygand know that he would soon be refuted. All his bombastic claims would soon be dashed. There's no doubt that at the onset of the Second World War, the French military assets were seemingly great. The world believed in her military strength. France's navy, led by Admiral Darlan, was the fourth most powerful globally. It had 175 warships, 7 capital ships, 2 aircraft carriers, 19 cruisers, 70 destroyers, and 77 submarines. Although later the French would sink much of this fleet to prevent it from falling into British and German hands. Its army was about 1 million strong at the front, with perhaps 4 million in reserve. It was expensively maintained, believed to be well trained and expertly led. The army lived on the victorious reputation of 1918. The concept of total war was not foreign to its tradition. The French were among the first ones to organize it. The French generals were also renowned. Commander-in-Chief Maurice Gamelin had played a role in the victory of the Marne. This victory was immortalized in former Chief of Staff of the French Army, Ferdinand Foch's famous message, "My right is rolled up, my left is driven back, my center is smashed. I have ordered an advance from all directions." The French army was not as well equipped as the Wehrmacht. However, it was believed this did not matter. The individual spirit of the Frenchmen was seen as superior to the collective obedience of the Germans. Above all, the French had morale. The troops were assured that this morale would lead them to victory in the end, as the infantry regulations of the French army explained it. The number and training of the combatants, the power and abundance of the weapons, are not all that count in war. Combat is in the last resort a battle of morale. Whatever may be the material forces employed by one side or the other, they never succeed in the destruction of the adversary. Among the survivors, it is the morale forces that decide victory. The vanquished party is not the one that suffers the most losses in men and material, but the one whose morale is the first to bend. But if things were so positive, then what went wrong? In 1939, the world stood on the brink of chaos. Britain and France sensed a possible German invasion of Poland. They pledged military support to the country if Germany attacked. 1st September 1939, the German invasion of Poland began. Panzers rolled in. The planes of the Luftwaffe roared overhead. The Blitzkrieg began. 3rd September, France and Britain declared war on Germany. Their ultimatum was ignored. The world plunged into yet another world war. Australia and New Zealand joined the conflict on the same day, South Africa on the 6th, and Canada on the 10th. The Allies were united, but their actions fell short. Politically, the commitments to Poland were met. Militarily, the Allies faltered. The Poles called it the Western Betrayal. The Munich Agreement of 1938 had already dashed hopes of Soviet assistance. The Soviet Union and Germany had struck a deal, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Poland would be partitioned. Poland had fallen within 4 weeks. Neither the French nor the British had foreseen such a quick defeat in Poland. The Germans' new mobile warfare strategy, called the Blitzkrieg, had caught them off guard. Very little happened in the West for the next 5 months. During this time of little activity, France built the Maginot Line. It was a series of fortifications along the German border. The goal? Economize manpower. Deter a German invasion similar to the First World War's Schlieffen-Plan. Force the enemy into Belgium. There, the best French divisions would meet them. This way, the war would stay outside the French soil. No repeat of the First World War's devastation. The 280-mile-long Maginot Line had dozens of fortresses, underground bunkers, minefields, and gun batteries. It was fortified with reinforced concrete and 55 million tons of steel embedded deep into the earth. The main section of this line stretched from Bessel in Switzerland to the Longwy in the Luxembourg frontier. The Ardennes was thought to be a natural barrier. General Philippe Pétain called the Ardennes impenetrable. Special provisions would crush any invasion force emerging from there. The French commander-in-chief, Maurice Gamelin, agreed. The area never favored large operations. In 1938, French war games tested a hypothetical German attack through the Ardennes. The result? The region seemed safe. The Meuse River would buy time to counter any attack. But reality would soon shatter these beliefs. The Maginot Line, a symbol of French confidence, would face its ultimate test. Hitler, on the other hand, hoped that the pause would weaken the resolve of Britain and France. He hoped this would encourage them to negotiate peace. This lack of action pleased Hitler's generals, who accelerated their preparations for attack in the West. It was the American press that dubbed this period of inaction as the Phony War. According to Marc Bloch, a French historian, there can be no doubt that our whole plan of campaign was wrong. At the onset of the Second World War, Allied strategy was built upon the assumption of a prolonged conflict. They expected a war akin to the First World War, a static conflict in which they could contain the enemy. This led them into creating long and exhaustive, yet ill-devised strategies. Since World War I, France harbored a deep-seated fear for one nation, Germany, the primary security threat, the devil, the monster lurking in the shadows. Due to this fear, the French diplomats forged alliances across Europe throughout the 1920s. The goal was to counter potential German aggression. Meanwhile, French military leaders stationed troops in strategic locations within the demilitarized zone of Rhineland to ensure security. Weapons inspectors scoured the countryside for illegal armaments and fortifications. Military planners continuously revised their strategies during the interwar period, focusing on defeating Germany. When Adolf Hitler launched his forces into the West in 1940, the French High Command had been preparing for war for 2 decades. Despite this, they were surprised by the speed of the German offensive. French military doctrine proposed a 2-phase war against Germany. Initially, France would maintain a strategic defensive posture for several years, followed by a transition to the strategic offensive once a military power was bolstered. Key elements including maintaining a continuous front and emphasizing firepower, particularly artillery. However, the French General Staff had given little thought to operationalizing the offensive phase required for victory. This will be revealed later in the video. The British planning staff developed a 3-phase approach: defensive operations to buy time, strategic bombing of Germany, and eventually transitioning to offensive operations with the US support. The British foresaw a 3-year conflict, but like the French, their vision of future offensive operations remained vague. After an interwar period marked by disagreements on handling Germany, France and Britain united against Hitler's aggression. The French, always wary of facing Germany alone, refused to risk war without the British support. Gamelin stressed the urgency of a French-British agreement, arguing that France couldn't defend its borders without British military aid. Thus, intelligence sharing between the two increased, and staff talks began in March 1939. Before spring, both sides, eager to avoid war, had not engaged in combined planning. This changed when Hitler occupied Czechoslovakia, violating the Munich Agreement. With war looming, French and British staff started formal discussions on a basic Allied military strategy. The philosophy of planning not to lose permeated Allied thinking. This is evident in all of Gamelin's plans. The French and the British predicted that Germany would focus an attack on the west in central Belgium. Gamelin developed the Allied campaign plan with a laser-like focus on Belgium, and to a lesser degree, the Netherlands. His operational vision, however, suffered from severe myopia. He developed 3 variations of a campaign plan for the defense of the West. Plan E, Exalt. Plan D, Dile, the Breda variant. They had slight variations of the same concept, no major differences. They required French and British forces to move as rapidly as possible into Belgium to check the expected German advance, except the Breda variant involved advancing into the Netherlands. The Allies had complete confidence in the outcome of the upcoming defensive fight, particularly in the French army's capabilities. When the Germans did not attack the West in 1939, Chamberlain boasted that the Germans had missed the bus. When the Germans attacked the Low Countries on 10th of May 1940, Gamelin responded with almost a smug confidence that the mighty Allies would repel the hated enemy. His counterpart in Britain, General William Edmund Ironside, did not doubt the Allied success, but Allied confidence was soon misplaced. Gamelin's plan to defend the West pleased Allied civilian leadership. However, his focus on central Belgium led to cascading disasters that Allied tactics and doctrine couldn't overcome. Daladier, like Gamelin, believed the French army's primary mission was to prevent defeat. General Ironside admitted the Allied outlook was uninspiring. He said, "A war cannot be won merely by trying not to lose it." Yet he supported the plan wholeheartedly. They believed that even without an Eastern Front, the Germans could be brought to their knees by blockade, as in the previous conflict. But the Germans had other plans. When the Germans launched their main attack near Sedan, far from south of where the Allies expected, their long war strategy and its supporting defensive plans were laid to waste. London felt it more. The echoes of the First World War still haunted them. Paris, too, had scars, but their resolve wavered less. Gamelin anticipated a German campaign that would mirror the trench warfare of the First World War. Little did he know that a radical departure from convention was about to unfold as fate had other plans. In 1939, Hitler told his generals that he wanted to attack France, and that too as soon as possible. His generals were shocked. Colonel General Franz Halder, Germany's Chief of General Staff, OKH, presented the first plan for an attack in the West. This involved an advance through central Belgium. This frontal attack aimed to push the Allies back to the River Somme. Hitler was disappointed with Halder's plan. He wanted an early attack, hoping for an easy victory due to the Allied unpreparedness. He pushed his generals to invade as early as the 25th of October, so Halder revised his plan. The new plan included a secondary attack on the Netherlands. His generals persuaded Hitler to delay the attack, but Hitler was in a rush. He was too eager to start his western offensive. 10 January 1940, a German aviator, Major Holmans, a 52-year-old base commander at Lodenheide Airfield, embarked on a routine reconnaissance flight. Holmans was flying to Cologne when he lost his way. Lost and desperate, he veered westward, hoping to find River Rhine. Unbeknownst to him, he had already crossed the Rhine, leaving German soil behind. Now over the River Meuse, a border between Belgium and the Netherlands, he circled like a lost, predestined soul. Then disaster struck. A lever in the cockpit, a fateful mistake. The engine of the aircraft sputtered, choked, and died. Holmans was forced to land in a Belgian field. But he wasn't alone. Major Helmut Reinberger, his unwitting passenger, was with him. What's interesting is that the major was holding documents, blueprints for the Nazi invasion. or Hitler's secret plan. The two officers were caught by Belgian border guards, and their documents were confiscated. This event, called the Mechelin incident, echoed across Europe. The Germans' audacious scheme lay exposed. General Alfred Jod, the Wehrmacht's chief of operations, writes in his diary what he had said to Hitler about this incident. If the enemy has all the files, the situation is catastrophic. Hitler, enraged, abandoned the original plan. He said the whole operation would have to be built on a new basis to secure secrecy and surprise. The hunt for an alternative plan began. Another chief of staff, Erich von Manstein, proposed moving north from Sedan, directly behind the main Allied forces in Belgium. Hitler liked his idea. He immediately adopted what came to be known as the Manstein Plan. Hitler then said to Jod, "We should then attack in the direction of Sedan. The enemy is not expecting us to attack there." The documents held by the Luftwaffe officers who crash-landed have convinced the enemy that we only intend to take over the Dutch and the Belgian coasts. So Army Group A would attack the south through Ardennes, crossing River Meuse, reaching Sedan, the town of Abbeville, and finally reaching where the River Somme met the sea. Army Group B, under Fedor von Bock, would strike the Allies in the north. The Mechelin incident prompted the Germans to drastically alter their plans. The French, on the other hand, especially Maurice Gamelin, the French commander-in-chief, interpreted it differently. He saw the event as confirmation of his suspicions about Germany's intentions. He correctly anticipated that Belgium would be the primary target. Had the Germans attacked in January, the French forces would have been better positioned to counter them. Consequently, the Allies fell victim to an inadvertent counterintelligence maneuver. Germany unintentionally disclosed its plans to the Allies, who were subsequently deceived. Rather than being cautious, the French failed to recognize that the captured documents might be compromised, allowing Germany to adapt and execute an attack elsewhere. The French committed a significant intelligence blunder. Not only did they neglect regular re-evaluation of German intentions, but they also overlooked critical signs pointing to Germany's plans after January 1940. For instance, numerous German reconnaissance planes flew over the Ardennes region. A captured pilot also admitted to reconnoitering the area near Sedan. An American historian, Ernest R. May, points at the flaw in the French intelligence in his book Strange Victory, as the French intelligence never addressed the question why or what is really going on. Thus, the Allies, especially the French, kept their eyes on the Maginot Line and Switzerland, but they were wrong. On the eve of the attack, the Allies had 135 divisions, 13,974 guns, 3,384 tanks, 3,099 aircraft, and a total of 2,862,000 men, whereas the Germans had 141 divisions, 7,378 guns, 2,445 tanks, 5,446 aircraft, and a total of 3,350,000 men. 10 May 1940. Dark skies loomed over Europe. The Allies stood united, but their fate hung in the balance. German forces launched their offensive. It was named Fallgelb, or Case Yellow. The German army was divided into three army groups. Army Group A, which composed of 45.5 divisions, including 7 armored commanded by Gerd von Rundstedt. This group was to deliver the decisive blow, cutting a Sichelschnitt, or sickle cut, as Erich von Manstein called it, through the Allied defenses in the Ardennes, spearheaded by 3 Panzer Corps trying to create the pocket. Army Group B comprised 29.5 divisions, including 3 armored under Fedor von Bock, and it was tasked with breaking through the Low Countries and pushing the northern units of the Allied armies into a pocket. Army Group C, led by Wilhelm von Lieb, was composed of 19 divisions and was charged with preventing a flanking movement from the east and with launching holding attacks against the Maginot Line and the Upper Rhine. About this daring plan, Manstein commented that the Germans just did the obvious thing. We attacked the enemy's weakest point. The Germans slithered through the shadows, infiltrating Luxembourg. They were so quick that during the night they occupied Luxembourg, and in the morning, German Army Group B under Bock, attacked Netherlands and Belgium. German paratroopers from the 7th Flieger and 22nd Air Landing Divisions descended like vengeful devils. Their target was Rotterdam in the Netherlands and Ibn Emael, a fortress guarding Belgium's heart. Explosions echoed through the mist. Allied generals huddled around maps. The plan unfolded. In a desperate attempt, they dispatched troops northward, a strategy similar to the Schlieffen Plan of World War I. This northern move committed their elite forces, eroding their combat effectiveness due to reduced readiness and mobility caused by fuel shortages. By nightfall, French troops had reached the Dutch border, but little did they know, they were dancing on the edge of a precipice. At night, the French and British pilots buckled up. Engines roared, but the Luftwaffe swooped down, talons sharp. Reconnaissance planes of the Allies fell. Their communication lines were poor and coordination thus frayed. The news of the clash arrived too late. General Martens, the corps commander, remained unaware for several hours, learning of the engagement only at 0500 hours. General Korab received the news even later. But Rotterdam's bridges glowed crimson. German boots pounded the pavement. Yet The Hague resisted. Dutch defenders rose, fury in their eyes, a city teetering on the brink. French troops marched north, blind to the trap. German intentions eluded them. Panzers surged towards Rotterdam. The clock ticked. Citizens fled Rotterdam. The Dutch, battered badly, surrendered on May 14th. Meanwhile, Fort Ibn Emael in Belgium crumbled. The British Expeditionary Force arrived, giving a fleeting hope to the Belgians. In the north, General Gamelin's forces advanced. Tanks roared in the Gembloux Gap. French armored divisions met the German panzer divisions. Smoke choked the fields. Approximately 100 lives were lost on both sides. The German offensive in Belgium turned out to be a clever feint. The center trembled as Army Group A surged forward. It shattered French regiments and light divisions of the cavalry, defending the Ardennes. Their advance reached Sedan over the Meuse River. This was no ordinary battle. It was a tale of terror and destruction. Instead of slowly assembling artillery, the Germans unleashed their full might. The thunderous roar of bombers. The sky became a canvas for chaos. Carpet bombing, punctuated by dive attacks, tore through the French lines like a predator's claw. The 55th Infantry Division of the French Army, stalwart defenders, faced relentless air bombardment, the heaviest the world had ever witnessed. The next morning was more horrifying for the Allies. Fanatical German combat engineers, wielding satchel charges, repulsed the French tank battalions by making suicidal attacks. The French tanks met the first German tanks that had crossed the river on dangerous bridges. News of this clash raced through the adjoining French 71st Infantry Division like wildfire. Panic swept the ranks. A general rout ensued, and still, the bridges stood, a lifeline for the invaders. As afternoon shadows lengthened, every available Allied light bomber took to the skies. Their mission? Obliterate those bridges. But destiny mocked their efforts. Despite the highest losses in the British and French Air Force, the bridges endured, mocking the Allies' desperation. The commander of the French Second Army, General Hunziger, immediately took effective measures to prevent a further weakening of his position. His armored and motorized division formed a protective barrier around their flank, thwarting further encroachments. Yet, beyond the French lines, a different story unfolded. Heinz Guderian, commander of the 19th Panzer Corps, cared little for Hunziger's flank. Instead, he seized the opportunity, leaving the 10th Panzer Division to guard the bridgehead. Guderian executed a daring move. On the 15th, his 1st and 2nd Panzer Divisions veered sharply westward, slicing through the French 9th Army's flank like a blade through silk. The distance covered 40 kilometers, left the French reeling. The 102nd Fortress Division, once immovable at Monthermé, faced a grim choice: abandon their positions or be overrun. Meanwhile, the French Second Army, battered and impotent, clung to survival. But it was the 9th Army that crumbled. In Belgium, their divisions, caught by surprise, lacked fortifications. They yielded to the unyielding German infantry. Erwin Rommel, The impetuous commander of the 7th Panzer Division seized the moment to break free. A desperate clash ensued. The French 1st Armored Division raced to block Rommel, but fate conspired against them. On the 15th, as they refueled, Rommel's lightning strike scattered the heavy French tanks. Suspense hung in the air. The fate of nations balanced on the edge of a blade. As spring blossomed, so did the German war machine. Picture it: mechanized force encircling, collapsing the enemy's operations. And that too with Blitzkrieg. This was Germany's lightning war strategy that involves speed and mobility to create shock and awe in the enemy. Its father was General Heinz Guderian. France had as many tanks and armored vehicles as Germany, but they still failed. Their failure underpinned a crucial strategic flaw. The Germans had concentrated their forces in completely mechanized armored divisions, allowing greater speed, shock, and awe. Unlike them, the French had split up their forces so that each infantry division had a few. This slowed them to the speed of marching soldiers. As Robert A. Doughty, an American military historian, explains, the French envisioned a tightly controlled battle in which all units and weapons were carefully marshaled and then employed in combat. The French preferred to have a step-by-step battle in which units obediently moved between phase lines and adhere to strictly scheduled timetables. They preferred a time-consuming, intricate process that prized preparation rather than improvisation. The German divisions were also supported by combat planes, another area neglected by the French. On the morning of the 15th of May, French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud telephoned the newly appointed Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Winston Churchill, and lamented, "We have been defeated. We are beaten. We have lost the battle." The French High Command was reeling from the shock of the sudden offensive. It was stung by a sense of defeatism. On the 16th, defiance echoed. Guderian and Rommel, insubordinate, pushed westward. Guderian raced to Marly, 80 kilometers from Sedan. Rommel, a phantom, crossed the Sambre at Le Cateau, 100 kilometers from Dinant. Radio silence shrouded Rommel's 7th Panzer Division. It was so fast that it earned the name of the Ghost Division. Tempers flared. Von Kleist confronted Guderian, but von Rundstedt held firm. Orders clashed and destiny was in danger. France had to face the full weight of an undivided German offensive. This was different from World War I, when half the German forces had been directed against Russia. Depression and hopelessness had filled the air of Paris. Churchill flew to Paris on the same day. He saw the French government already burning its archives and preparing for an evacuation of the capital. He tried to console them but failed. In a mournful meeting with the French commanders, Churchill asked General Gamelin, "Where is the strategic reserve?" Gamelin's response was stark, "There is none." When Churchill pressed about a counterattack against the flanks of the German Bulge, Gamelin replied, "Inferiority of numbers, the inferiority of equipment, the inferiority of methods." General Gamelin's assessment proved accurate. Most reserve divisions were already committed. The sole remaining armored division, 2nd DCR, launched an attack on the 16th. However, the French infantry's armored divisions were specialized for breakthroughs and attacking fortified positions. While they could defend effectively when entrenched, their utility in direct combat was limited. Lacking motorized infantry, they couldn't execute combined infantry-tank tactics. Additionally, their heavy char B-1 bis, their main tank, consumed half of the French tank budget as it required frequent refueling. Consequently, the 2nd DCR formed a defensive screen, but without significant strategic impact. Although some of their finest units in the north had yet to face combat, their potential as a reserve force remained untapped. Unfortunately, their recent movement northward had already diminished their fighting strength. Returning south would cost an even greater toll. The formidable 1st DLM was initially deployed near Dunkirk on the 10th. Within 32 hours, its forward units had covered 220 kilometers to the northeast, well beyond the Dutch city of 's-Hertogenbosch. However, upon discovering the Dutch retreat to the north, the division withdrew and began its southward journey. When it eventually faced the Germans again, only 3 of its original 80 Somoa S-35 tanks remained operational, largely due to breakdowns. Despite the potential to save most mechanized and motorized divisions, including the BEF, a radical decision to retreat southward and avoid contact would have left around 30 infantry divisions to their fate. The loss of Belgium alone would have dealt a significant political blow. Additionally, the Allies grappled with uncertainty regarding Germany's intentions. The Germans threatened on multiple fronts: northward to attack the main Allied force directly, westward to cut it off, southward to occupy Paris, and even eastward to maneuver behind the Maginot Line. In response, the French established a new reserve by utilizing units withdrawn from the Maginot Line to defend the paths to Paris. General Charles de Gaulle, leading France's hastily assembled 4th Armored Division, attempted a southern attack. It initially achieved some success as it briefly saved Paris. However, his efforts on the 17th and the 19th were thwarted when the reinforced German army pushed him further southwest. While the Allies remained passive, the German Panzer Corps seized the opportunity on the 17th and the 18th. They refueled, replenished, and readied their tanks. But this was no ordinary maintenance. It was a preparation for something bigger. On the 18th, Rommel played his hand. With a mere feint of an armored attack, he forced the French to surrender Cambrai. The chessboard shifted, and the Allies were caught unprepared. The 19th dawned with the German high command feeling invincible. The Allies stumbled, unable to keep pace. Paris beckoned, a tempting target. General Franz Halder, Chief of Army General Staff, toyed with the idea of a knockout blow. He wanted to attack Paris immediately to knock France out of the war. Up north, the Allied troops retreated towards the river Escaut. Their right flank crumbled under the relentless push of the 3rd and 4th Panzer Divisions. The clock ticked. Inaction was no longer an option. The Panzer Corps sprang into action. They smashed through the feeble British 18th and 23rd Territorial Divisions, capturing Amiens. At Abbeville, they secured the vital bridge over the Somme at Abbeville, trapping the British, French, Dutch, and Belgian forces in the north. All French phone centers were located in Abbeville. The Germans cut the lines, preventing phone calls and telegrams, the only means of communication within the French military. By evening on the 20th, a reconnaissance unit from the 2nd Panzer Division reached Noyelles, westward by 100 kilometers. There, it glimpsed the Somme's estuary merging with the Channel, a scene ripe with fate. On May 20th, French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud sacked Maurice Gamelin for failing to halt the German onslaught. Enter Maxime Weygand, the man with a desperate mission. His task was to stop the armored juggernaut that threatened to crush France. He quickly attempted to devise new tactics to contain the Germans. The Weygand plan took shape. It demanded a pincher movement, attacks from both north and south, to sever the German spearhead. On the map, it looked feasible. The corridor through which von Kleist's Panzer Corps had surged was a mere 40 kilometers wide. Weygand had forces on paper, the 3 DLM and the BEF in the north, de Gaulle's 4th DCR in the south, a formidable 1,200 tanks. But the reality was harsh. The Allies scraped together a handful of tanks, while the Panzer Division's machines teetered on the brink of collapse. On the 21st, Weygand flew to Ypres, pleading with Belgians and the BEF about the soundness of his plan. His plan was, in truth, like a fragile thread against the German might. That same day, Major General Harold Edwards' British Expeditionary Forces struck. They aimed at delaying the German offensive and, perhaps, cutting the leading edge of the German army off. The Battle of Arras showcased the indomitable British Matilda tanks. German anti-tank guns faltered. Panic rippled through the enemy ranks. German commander at Arras, Erwin Rommel, reporting being attacked by a phantom army, though there were only 58 tanks. The German offensive was stalled. Weygand seized the opportunity, deploying reinforcements from the south, but he was running out of time. Amidst the chaos, an uncoordinated attack rattled the German high command. Fear gripped them. An ambush, perhaps? 1,000 Allied tanks poised to shatter their elite forces. Yet dawn broke resolve. On the 22nd, orders echoed. Guderian's 19th Panzer Corps must surge north, toward Boulogne and Calais. The Channel ports beckoned, but peril loomed. On the same day, French forces struck south, east of Arras. The infantry and tanks clashed, but the German infantry closed in. The 32nd Infantry Division held the line, but barely. Weygand, seeking control, flew to the front. His plane fell, a severed link to French command. The British Expeditionary Force waited, rudderless. They went without orders for 4 days straight. On the 24th, the 7th DIC launched a feeble southern attack. Tanks strained, but Amiens remained elusive. Then the British 1st Armored Division charged on the 27th, only to stagger back, battered. De Gaulle tried again, but fate had spoken. Even victory couldn't rescue the beleaguered northern forces. The die was cast, a battle teetering on the edge. In the pre-dawn hours of the 23rd, General Gort faced a grim decision: retreat or face annihilation. The Weygand plan crumbled, and hope dwindled. The Flemish coast, a last bastion, teetered on the brink. Gort ordered a retreat from Arras. The 2nd Panzer Division struck Boulogne. That day, while the 10th Panzer broke down on Calais, Boulogne clung to life, its defenders bolstered by destroyers, evacuating 4,368 souls. But Calais, despite reinforcements, the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment and the 30th Guards Brigade succumbed to the German onslaught on the 27th. Meanwhile, the 1st Panzer Division was poised to seize Dunkirk. Yet, on the 24th, Hitler's fateful order halted them. Controversy swirled. Hermann Göring had promised Luftwaffe supremacy, but von Rundstedt warned of dire consequences. Armored divisions strained, their purpose twisted. Cities weren't their domain. As the noose tightened, the British launched Operation Dynamo, Operation Ariel, and Operation Cycle. A desperate exodus unfolded, evacuating Allied forces from the northern pocket. During Operation Dynamo, 338,000 Allied soldiers were. During Operation Ariel, 191,870, and Operation Cycle, 338,226 Allied soldiers were evacuated. But King Leopold III of Belgium planned to surrender the following day, which was postponed till the 28th, a dangerous dance on the edge of defeat. This surrender came as a shock to the Allies, as the Belgian government had not consulted them. Angry Renault called the king a pig. Anyway, the finest French armies marched northward, their modern might a beacon of hope. But fate twisted the threads of destiny. Encircled, they bled. Heavy weaponry lost, armored formations shattered. General Weygand faced a gaping wound stretching from Sedan to the Channel. Doubt gnawed at the French government's resolve. Could they still defy the German might? June 5th, the Germans struck anew. German forces began fall rot or case red. Panzers roared across the Somme and Aisne rivers. The Luftwaffe from above. The remaining Allied divisions in France, 60 French and 2 British, made a determined stand. But they were no match for Germany's air superiority and armored mobility. Paris quivered. On the 10th of June, Italy joined the war on Germany's side. The Italian invasion of France began. German armies outflanked the Maginot Line. They pushed deep into France. The French government fled, leaving Paris exposed, an open city. Churchill returned. Desperation clouded the air. The French War Council begged for every fighter. Yet Churchill knew the true battleground lay beyond the Channel. Promises were extracted, but shadows loomed. France's fate had been written. Its army brass began to surrender. On June 14th, Paris fell, unopposed. June 25th, in a railroad car near Compiègne, echoing with history, formal surrender came. the same place where the armistice of World War I was signed back in 1918. Prime Minister Paul Reynaud, bound by an agreement with Britain, stepped down. Henri Pétain accepted the armistice, dividing France. The north and west fell to German occupation, while Vichy France emerged in the south, a puppet regime. But Charles de Gaulle, defiant and resolute, rallied Free French forces. Across oceans, colonies chose loyalty over collaboration. Admiral Darlan's vow to protect the fleet wavered. The British and French ships clashed, and trust eroded. Amidst the wreckage, animosity festered. It stained the once unbreakable bond between the French and the British allies. On June 22, 1940, France signed an armistice with Germany. A few days later, the French Parliament voted to remove the previous government and to give Chief of State Marshal Philippe Pétain full and extraordinary powers. According to The Guardian, the Republic's liberty, equality, and fraternity, liberté, égalité, fraternité, was replaced with Pétain's work, family, fatherland, travail, famille, patrie. Between 1,500,000 and 1,900,000 French soldiers were taken prisoner. 401,000 were dead or wounded, and were 15,000 missing. On the other side, only 27,000 German soldiers were dead, 110,000 were wounded, and were 18,000 missing. This was perhaps the largest military disaster in history. German Blitzkrieg struck France, bringing her crashing down. In just 40 days, the Germans annihilated the proudest army in Europe. They mocked the elaborate fortifications. They reduced the general staff to nothing. In 40 days, France, once the world's second largest empire, ceased to exist as a power. Vanquished, humiliated, the swiftness was overwhelming. The French people were left dazed, crushed in spirit, tearful, and unbelieving. They did not know what hit them. To this day, it is uncertain if they know. Now, let's look at the reasons behind why the Allies lose the Battle of France. Let's be honest, the French were psychologically unprepared for war. Their leaders, both military and political, were divided between right and left. The right was fascist, in sympathy. Leaders like Philippe Pétain, who later on became the head of the collaborationist regime of Vichy France, admired Hitler's achievements in Germany and wanted an agreement with him. The communists, such as Maurice Thorez, following the non-aggression pact between Germany and the USSR, were also against the war. The phony war benefited them. This long period of inaction provided time for a peace party to develop on the right. One person, Pierre Laval, is particularly notable in this regard. He was a member of the French section of the Workers' International, a socialist party. He was a fascist sympathizer. Laval argued that war was futile. He said there was no point in continuing it since the Poles, whom they were supposed to be helping, had been defeated. In 1940, he joined Marshal Pétain's government as Minister of State. He played a key role in persuading the government to stay in France and accept an armistice. This ensured a legal government in Paris that could negotiate a peace treaty. He also convinced the Assembly to dissolve itself, ending the Third Republic on July 10, 1940. He pushed for constitutional revisions, believing in an inevitable German victory. He thought France's best option was to collaborate with Germany. Then he started negotiations on his own. This led to mistrust among his fellow ministers. Pétain dismissed him in December 1940. He was later executed on charges of treason. The French military leadership was also disastrous. Generals Maurice Gamelin and Maxime Weygand, the commanders-in-chief, faltered. Civilian leaders, especially Philippe Pétain, compounded the problem. Their ill-planned actions crippled France's war effort against Germany. If Gamelin's mistakes were imprudence and lack of energy, Weygand's was defeatism. Less than a week after his appointment, he showed signs of pessimism. Some saw it as defeatism. When fall rot began and the Germans crossed the Somme in force, he openly spoke in a defeatist tone. The French High Command was content to sit behind the Maginot Line. Unfortunately, the Maginot Line did not continue along the frontier between France and Belgium. This was partly because that might have offended the Belgians. This could also be because Pétain believed that the Ardennes would be a strong enough barrier. Whatever the case, this was exactly where the Germans broke through. Also, no attempt was made to help Poland by attacking Germany in the West in September 1939. This might have had a good chance of success. Military defeats gave the pessimist right the chance to come out into the open and put pressure on the government to accept a ceasefire. There was also a lack of effective coordination among the Allied forces. The interests and thus the plans of all Allied members often clashed. The Dutch and the Belgians did not allow other allies to initially enter their territories, as they feared this would provoke Hitler. The King Leopold III of the Belgian government later on resigned without consulting the Allies. Finally, just before the final collapse of France, London had proposed combining France and Britain into one state so they could continue the war, but the French leadership became suspicious. It was thought that this was Britain's plot to take over the French colonies. There is no doubt that the Allied war strategy was ill-planned. Also, their weapons could not stand the test of the German Blitzkrieg. To top it all, communication among the French forces also posed a significant challenge. The French were hesitant to adopt radios. This hindered their responsiveness. The Germans had anticipated this, recognizing that the French prioritized communication security. Consequently, the French relied on phones, telegrams, and couriers, resulting in painfully slow reaction times. Vital orders often arrived too late, especially for units in motion. During the initial 8 to 9 days of the campaign, when General Gamelin led, frontline units waited approximately 48 hours for orders from the French top headquarters. If you found this account of the Allies' defeat in the Battle of France compelling, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below and suggest other historical events you'd like us to explore. Stay tuned for more captivating stories from history.